Abraham was a very old man, and his wife Sarah was very old too. For many, many years, they had wished for a child more than anything else in the world. They prayed and hoped, but they remained childless. Then one day, God gave them a wonderful promise. He told Abraham that he would have a son. And even though it seemed impossible because of their great age, Abraham believed God. He trusted that God would keep his promise, and he waited patiently. God is always faithful, and he kept his word to Abraham. True to God's promise, a baby boy was born to Abraham and Sarah. They named him Isaac, which means he laughs, because Sarah had laughed with joy when she heard she would finally have a son. Isaac was their miracle, the light of their lives. Abraham loved Isaac with all his heart. He watched him grow from a tiny baby into a strong, happy boy. They would spend their days together, with Abraham teaching Isaac all about the world and, most importantly, about the one true God who had blessed them so much. Isaac was the promise of a great nation to come, just as God had said. The bond between the father and son was incredibly strong, a beautiful sight for all to see. Isaac was not just a son, he was the future. God had promised Abraham that through Isaac, his family would become as numerous as the stars in the sky and the grains of sand on the seashore. Every time Abraham looked at his boy, he was reminded of God's incredible power and his loving kindness. Isaac was the living proof that God always keeps his promises, no matter how long it takes or how impossible it seems. He was a treasure beyond compare. So life in their camp was filled with happiness and contentment. Abraham, Sarah, and Isaac were a small, loving family, living under the vast, open sky and trusting in God's plan for them. Abraham knew that God had a special purpose for his son, and for the generations that would follow. He felt a deep sense of peace, believing that God, who had given him this precious gift, would always watch over them. Their days were simple, but their hearts were full, knowing they were part of God's amazing story. One day God spoke to Abraham again. But this time God's words were not a promise of joy. They were a test, the hardest test Abraham would ever face. God said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will show you." Abraham's heart must have felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces. How could God ask for such a thing? To give up the son he had waited for his entire life. The son who was the very promise of God made real. Abraham did not understand why God was asking this of him. It was a command that seemed to go against everything he knew about God's goodness and his promises. The sadness and confusion he must have felt are almost impossible for us to imagine. He loved Isaac more than words could say, yet deep within his soul, Abraham's faith in God was stronger than his own understanding. He had walked with God for many years and knew that God was wise and good, even when his ways were mysterious. He decided he must obey. So, very early the next morning, while it was still dark and quiet, Abraham got up. He did not wake Sarah or tell her what he was about to do. He saddled his donkey and called 2 of his servants to come with him. He also chopped the wood they would need for the special fire of the offering. Then he woke his beloved son Isaac. Together, the small group set off on their journey towards the distant land of Moriah, the place God had told him about. Every step must have been heavy with sorrow for Abraham. For 3 long days, they traveled in silence. The sun beat down on them as they walked, and the mountains grew closer and closer. What was Abraham thinking during that time? He must have been praying, talking to God in his heart, asking for strength. He must have looked at his innocent son walking beside him and felt a pain too deep for tears. Isaac, not knowing what was planned, probably chatted and asked questions, enjoying the adventure with his father. Abraham had to hide his terrible secret and keep walking forward one step at a time. On the 3rd day of their journey, Abraham looked up and saw the mountain that God had shown him in the distance. He knew this was the place. He turned to his 2 servants and said, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there to worship, and then we will come back to you." Notice his words. We will come back. Even in this dark moment, Abraham held on to a sliver of hope, a powerful belief that somehow God would make things right and that he and Isaac would return together. He was trusting God, even when it made no sense at all. Abraham took the wood for the offering and placed it on Isaac's shoulders for him to carry up the mountain path. He himself carried the fire pot and the knife. As they walked up the slope together, just the two of them, Isaac noticed something was missing. He turned to his father and asked a simple, innocent question. "Father?" he said. "Yes, my son?" Abraham replied, his voice probably trembling. "The fire and the wood are here," Isaac said. "But where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" This question must have pierced Abraham's heart like a sword. Abraham looked at his son, the boy he loved so dearly, and gave a gentle and faith-filled answer. "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son," he told him. And so the two of them continued on their way together, walking towards the summit of the mountain. Abraham's answer showed his incredible trust. He did not know how God would provide, but he believed that he would. He was leaving everything in God's hands, choosing to have faith in the face of an impossible situation and a command he could not comprehend. When they finally reached the very top of the mountain, the place God had chosen, Abraham built an altar out of stones he found there. He carefully arranged the wood on top of the altar, making everything ready. Then came the hardest moment of all. He turned to Isaac, and he gently tied his hands and feet. With a heart full of sorrow but a spirit full of obedience, he laid his only son on the altar, on top of the wood. Abraham had followed every single one of God's instructions, no matter how painful they were. Abraham stood over his son, his hand holding the knife. He took a deep breath and raised his arm, ready to obey God completely. At that very last second, just as he was about to bring the knife down, a voice called out to him from heaven. "Abraham! Abraham!" it called. "Here I am," Abraham answered, stopping immediately. It was the angel of the Lord. The angel said, "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Relief must have washed over Abraham like a flood. He lowered his arm, his whole body shaking. He untied Isaac and hugged him tighter than he ever had before. At that moment, Abraham looked up and saw something caught in a nearby thicket. It was a ram, its horns tangled in the bushes. God had provided the sacrifice, just as Abraham had told Isaac he would. Abraham joyfully took the ram and offered it on the altar instead of his son. He was so thankful that he named that place "The Lord Will Provide." This whole terrible experience was a test. God never wanted Abraham to harm Isaac. He wanted to see if Abraham's faith was real and true. He wanted to know if Abraham loved and trusted him more than anything else in the world, even more than his own precious, long-awaited son. Abraham passed the test. His actions showed that his obedience to God was absolute. Because of his great faith, God blessed Abraham again, promising once more that his family would be countless, and that through them, the whole world would be blessed. The story of Abraham and Isaac teaches us a very important lesson about faith. Faith means trusting God completely, even when we are scared or confused. It means obeying him, even when we don't understand his reasons. Abraham showed that he was willing to give God his most treasured possession because he believed God was good and had a plan. In the end, God did not take Isaac away. Instead, he provided a different way and rewarded Abraham's incredible trust. It shows us that God is always faithful to those who are faithful to him.